Okay, so thanks for your attention for that. Those are excerpts from 5 different performances I've given this year. These are my collaborators on here. I've started doing this in April and have had, I will have had 7 soon. So I'm going to talk about this work. Why am I doing this? For a while, I had a different art practice than a technology day job practice, and my desire was kind of to bring those together, use the same skill set. Developments in my day job could feed my art job. My art job might feed my day job, although there's not so many day jobs that need what I'm doing there, but the underlying coding skills are useful. I'm inspired by a few things. Experimental film, this is me reflected in 16mm film frames by an artist named Paul Sheretz. This is at the Sheretz Archive in Buffalo. Sheretz did a number of interesting color experiments with 16mm projectors, where he would have different colored frames and they would overlap and you'd have something like this. These images are from the Smithsonian. Again, old technology because he was working in the 60s and 70s, but 16mm projectors bleeding into each other and creating these very rapidly changing color things. I'm also interested in light and space, so James Turrell installation, these Gansfeld things that he creates that you basically get lost in color in these physical rooms. I'm a little interested in the kind of crazy 60 light shows. I don't know so much about them because they were a little bit before my time, but people having overhead projectors with oil fluids of colors and slide projectors, 16mm, doing these to rock bands. And then I'm also interested in sort of letrist experiments in concrete poetry. These I took yesterday. There's a great show by the artist Yanis Kounelis at the Walker Arts Center right now. Looks like this. I would recommend you go. I'm going to go again tomorrow. But I'm also interested in like outsider art, such as James Castle, or the Canadian poet Derek Bulow, who does these letter-set pieces with kind of strange text. They're very beautiful. How I do this? Well, on the software side, I'm now using MapLibre, which is a fork from Mapbox.gl, open source stuff. I'm using OpenMap Tiles, TileServer.gl, which is OpenStreetMap infrastructure. I'm using a piece of software that probably is the most unfamiliar to this audience, which is OpenStage Control. I'll show you some of that. And then there's 1,000 some lines of JavaScript that tie it all together, and that's my contribution to this. OSC is a few things. OSC is part of the name of OpenStage Control, but it really comes from this protocol called Open Sound Control, which if you're a musician, you may have heard of MIDI, which is a way of sending instructions from instrument to other instrument or computer to instrument. OSC is a little bit more modern than that, although neither of them are really modern anymore. But it's more designed to be general, so I've used that, and I'll show you some examples. When I'm performing, I'm sitting it with my iPad, which looks like this. I have the dials here are all hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha channels for various geographic entities, so background, water, so on, kind of following these the OSM models. I would like more detail, but I only have a certain amount of real estate. I can also control rotation, bearing, zoom, pitch, and these things with the sliders on the right. I have a few pre-programmed palettes that I can switch to quickly. These are all monochromes and are based on some other work I was doing earlier this year. This is the strobing that I get in some of the CSS, the HTML, because this all runs in a web browser. So this is a way of controlling CSS borders and colors, and then there's some things that I custom built here that control the strobing, so I can give it different waveforms or different patterns, depending on what I'm trying to do. I have a number of pre-programmed destinations, so when I fly or when I look at maps and I see something interesting on the ground or in front of me, I'll make a note of it and incorporate it into this panel. Some of these are boring and they will go away before the next performance, but I can quickly get to something that has visual interest to me. With this panel, this is sort of interesting in that I can also call up GPS traces of places that I've visited in the past and replay them, so you can get motion on the screen. There's also a new experiment where I'm using OSM, the routing engine, to generate like street traffic and go longer distances. And then I have a similar panel where I can control the fonts, choose sizes, and so on. This is a session on my desktop, not with the iPad, but if you watch as I move through here you can see some activity. These are the messages going from my control panel to my laptop, which then impacts the style of the map down below, which would be what would be projected in performance. And this is an example of the kind of, I don't want to say packets, but the messages that are being passed from my control surface to the computer. So here I'm using an address /background/color, so it looks very much like a URL, and since I do a lot of web design, this makes it web design or web programming that's more comfortable to me than thinking in terms of nodes and instruments. And then these are just the values of hue, saturation, and so on. Here's a similar set of instructions for changing from one font to another and what size it should be, and so on. So all of this gets coded into the open stage control, and then I have to write software on the other end that takes these and then tells MapLibre what to do. Third part of the puzzle is collaborators and the audience, and I'll just say I've been really fortunate to work with fantastic musicians, people who, I may have followed their career for 30 years, and one day I know I'm going to be in New York, so I email them, and they're like, yeah, it sounds interesting, let's give this a shot. I'm like, oh my God. So that's been quite fun. Q&A sessions after the performances or talking to people out on the patio in front have been very interesting, just to hear what it means to people to see this, because it's it's unfamiliar if you're going to music shows, it's unfamiliar use of maps, it's a different thing. So making sense of it is part of the game. And it's also interesting to be in an improvisation situation and realize that even though I'm doing all this visual stuff, my brain is probably listening to the musicians 70, 80% of the time. Okay, tomorrow night I'm doing a show. It's in your program. It's at a place called Mirror Lab Studios, which is like a 20-minute bus ride south of here. Liz Draper, upright bassist, she plays with everybody here, but she's internationally known because she tours with a group called Low, which is from Duluth, and actually they were supposed to be in Europe now, but one of their members is undergoing some medical issues, so Liz is in town, and that's the space. I haven't been there yet, but they do expanded cinema type things, so I have a good feeling about it. That's all that. You can come if you haven't registered, but if you've registered, you're coming already. And then if you happen to be in the Bay Area, I'm doing a show in the Mission District on the 5th with Kevin Corcoran, who does unusual things with drums and also works with samples. And then we were talking a little bit earlier, Chris Bobrowski has this instrument built of glass that holds water, and she can adjust the levels, and they're connected by pipes. So as she plays, these water is moving slowly around. She uses it as a percussion instrument. It's quite beautiful. Again, I don't know her. I emailed her. She's like, sounds interesting. Let's do it. And that's about it. A lot of the work started at the Signal Culture residency. They've recently moved from Owego, which is kind of a Rust Belt town in upstate New York, to Loveland, Colorado. So I'm hoping to do something with them for the AAG meeting in Denver. Am I forgetting anything? No, I think that's it. I wanted to leave time for questions. Is that one for questions? Okay, ask me a good one. Yes, Vanessa.
I'm really curious about how the sound is associated with the geography. I noticed, because you said you had some set geographies, and they're also set, are they set colors as well as you listening and saying, I want to play this to this particular sound, or is it based on how you're feeling listening to music?
No, it really depends on the musician. The colors and sound are very much a conversation during the piece. I've always offered the musician a chance to tell me about a meaningful geography or a form of geography. Like, do you like grids? Do you like nature? Ned Rothenberg, this saxophonist, unfortunately, the night of the show is like, I really like contour lines. I'm like, well, I'll build that for next time. So, yeah, these are not really, there's not a lot of, there's things I'm familiar with, and the more, the better I know the data set, the better I can work it. But these are all improvisations, and I have email exchanges with the musicians, but we have not really rehearsed other than a sound check and maybe a 20-minute run through. Other questions? Time's up. Okay, talk to me afterwards. Come to the show tomorrow. Thank you.